Greetings! So for the next few weeks, we're going to be focusing on the complementary dynamics of employee recruiting, hiring, retention, and reward. While these dynamics have always been at the forefront of public sector HR reform, the pandemic is requiring organizations to further re-examine how these practices can facilitate more equitable, diverse, sustainable, and healthy workplaces. So these are the following questions and considerations I would like for you to think about as you're going through this unit. And please note these are just a few examples of things to think about. You are very much encouraged to peruse current events so that you can understand additional ones and understand the current landscape related to hiring, recruiting, retention, and reward. So to proceed, here are just a few things to think about. How can public organizations attract and find diverse talent pools and maintain diversity beyond the hiring and recruiting phases? How can long-term reward and retention practices be informed by equity, belonging, and justice? How can the hiring process be streamlined to facilitate quicker execution from job posting to onboarding of new employees so as not to lose candidates but also advance organizational missions? And what are effective ways to reward employees considering resource restrictions, such as money, that are facing public organizations? As public organizations face increased service demands, how can they ensure that employees are supported enough to remain at organizations? So, for example, providing better telework options, higher wages, and healthcare. And what are special considerations for the public sector? So, for example, volunteers are a unique form of labor that nonprofits heavily rely upon, but they're not exactly full-time or part-time employees. So there are different ways in which to recruit and retain and reward volunteers. So before we dive into a framework or a model that helps you to understand what drives recruitment, retention, hiring, and rewards, as well as what are outcomes related to them, it's useful to get a high-level bird's-eye view of like a life cycle or an overall process and indicating how these things are connected. So first, organizations have to identify their needs to inform recruiting and hiring strategies. Now, these needs can be identified from strategic planning. And then there's the cultivation of a labor pool. And in essence, this means that the organization is appearing to be attractive based on audience and needs. So for example, how you recruit or cultivate a labor pool based on college students who are in their early career might be different than how you cultivate or make an organization appear attractive to a mid-level career person looking for a career change. And then in the next step in the life cycle or process, you have creating effective job posts and then distributing that opportunity into various pools to attract potential employees. And then you have to create and use various standards and criteria to narrow your candidate pool. And then you establish and execute a hiring process that includes applications and interviewing. And then once you have decided upon candidates, you have to actually onboard them into specific positions and possibly into designated pathways. So for example, incoming people might be put onto a management pathway. Then you have establishing and utilizing performance management systems, which includes significant data analysis to inform reward mechanisms and distribution of those rewards, as well as retention. And so in addition to looking at the antecedents and outcomes, it's important to ensure that processes related to recruiting, hiring, reward, and retention are legal, strategic, supported with buy-in by organizational actors, and aligned with infrastructure and resources. So what I mean by this last part is that you have to have the infrastructures and resources to actually support what you intend on doing with these four practices. So for example, if you have a reward system that you have designed to rely strongly upon finances, then you have to make sure that you actually have money to provide people with those rewards. So now let's take a look at an illustration that highlights the drivers and antecedents and outcomes of recruiting, hiring, retention, and rewards. So here you see I have different drivers and antecedents such as individual, organizational, and environmental factors that impact how organizations go about recruiting, hiring, retaining, and rewarding employees. And then those four practices result in various things related to employee engagement, satisfaction, loyalty, turnover, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice, productivity, and mission delivery. So for example, individual factors can include things such as salary requirements. It can include things as reward preferences. So for example, whereas someone might be happy with a raise in salary, someone else might prefer something like tuition reimbursement. And then you have individual factors such as, let's say, public service motivation that makes certain places more attractive than others. And then you have organizational factors such as the needs of an organization. So for instance, if an organization is having, let's say, a shortfall of people who can execute a certain kind of task or fulfill a certain part of the mission, then that is going to inform who they're going to actually go about recruiting or hiring and retaining. And then you have environmental factors such as, let's say, human service needs. So the pandemic is a great example of that. And then also other factors such as supply and demand of the labor market. Now the following slides provide more detailed schematics illustrating the high-level relationships depicted in the previous slide. So please know that these are only a few examples. They come from existing journal articles, and so you are encouraged to do some research on your own to find how authors, how scholars and researchers and practitioners have further detailed out how these relationships work. So for example, in this depiction here from the article by Aziz called Human Resource Management Practices and Employee Retention, it's a lit review. He posits that employee retention is based upon job satisfaction, which in turn is based on leadership, rewards, salary, compensation, training and development, career development, and recognition. This article here by Mendes called The Impact of Reward Systems on Employee Turnover and Retention, a study on logistics industry of Sri Lanka. Turnover and retention is dependent upon the reward system, and there are different types of rewards highlighted here, including remuneration, cash incentives, work-life balance, supervisor support, and employee recognition. And then this last one here is a schematic or a model by Schlater and Piper, called from their article Employee Referral Hiring in Organizations, an Integrative Conceptual Model, Review and Agenda for Future Research. And what you have here is a 3-phase process highlighted where people who are being hired based on referral, that whole referral process depends upon social tie strength. It depends upon the motivation of those who are doing the referring, and that motivation can be broken down to external motivation. So for example, you might have a program at your job where you get a monetary bonus or a prize if you refer someone for hiring, and then you also have internal motivation of people who are doing referrals as well. And so this schematic goes into actually 2 phases over time. And so there you have the kind of the first phase that is before the application hiring, where people might say, okay, hey, you know what, there's a new job opening up at my place of work, you should consider. And then you have the actual process after that, where the referent actually decides to apply to the position, and then they go through the regular channels of hiring. And then, you have these outcomes from the hiring referral process, whether or not the person is hired or not. So again, the point of these slides here is just to highlight how that model that I showed you previously, the high-level one, it can be broken down into much more detail. And so it's incumbent upon you to think about what impacts hiring in ways that are different than things that impact recruitment or things that impact rewards, and then what happens at a more detailed level with outcomes. Okay, so as we wrap up, I just want to make a special point of talking about technology, and that's because technology has been used to streamline and theoretically improve recruitment, hiring, retention, and reward practices. And examples include, but are not limited to, algorithms that review resumes and cover letters, artificial intelligence, AI tools to reduce bias, and performance management systems to inform reward programs and benefits. Now, what's important here is to recognize that although technology has been seen as a benefit, it is also controversial, where the irony is that things such as algorithms and AI have actually been shown to reinforce bias. And so as someone who might rely upon these things, or you might be tapped to, let's say, consult in an HR capacity, it's important to recognize the pros and the cons. And so what you are encouraged to do is to find out how are companies actually tweaking the use of their algorithms, supplementing it with more human intervention, as well as tweaking artificial intelligence tools and refining them. Okay, so for the next few weeks, please make sure that you're focusing even more on self-care, as it can be a little bit harder to push through as we head towards the end of the semester. And along with that, make sure that you are forming learning and community groups so that you can get that extra support that you need to get through material, but also to support your well-being. And if you have not done so, please try to engage in some reading challenges. And for this week, we are going to have a bit of a truncated assignment schedule. So make sure that you are on pace to do the Rising Above as well as the online discussion board, both due by April the 10th at 11:59 p.m. And that's the end of the lecture. So if you need any help, please let me know.